Button. As soon as I said it, I had another wave of people coming in. So, all right. Welcome everyone to the May T3. I cannot believe it's already the third Thursday in May. That does not seem right, but it is. And here we are. Today, we're going to be continuing our examination of persistence and retention for our students. This again comes from the Journey to Retention research that Kim and Laura and Amy and I were exposed to at the regional NRS training last summer. So we thought we'd take a deeper dive again into some of the evidence base for student retention. And this month, we're looking at the impact of flexibility on persistence. And, as I started working on this, I thought, well, this seems really obvious on the surface, right? But in spite of what many of us, and I'm including me in this, in spite of what many of us think and say, it's really not all that easy to be flexible sometimes. And so we're going to start our discussion with just kind of a brief activity to think about and talk about some of the challenges and barriers that adult students face. We're going to think about that in terms of the research, but also in terms of your own lived experience, because you all have a lot of experience on students who have difficulty persisting. And then we're going to look at the areas those same studies, those research studies identified as places where flexibility can lead to increased student persistence. And as always, I prefer it when you talk more than I do. So if you have any thoughts, questions, ideas, stories, be sure to jump in and share. You can use the chat or you can unmute and use your voice. So I want to start out by just asking you, and I'm using Mentimeter today, so don't be freaked out. Menti.com, MENTI.com, and you can see the code on the screen there, 26500935. You can do this on your desktop, you can do it on your phone, but just go ahead and type in there what challenges or barriers prevent your students from persisting in class. Oh, we got one. No time in big letters. Oh, exhausted. I feel that one today. I do. Childcare, life in general. What was a good one? Jobs. Oh, negative past experiences. That's a good one. Transportation, cultural barriers. So far, I don't think we have any repeats. Fear. Let me give it a second and see if there's any others. Oh, technology, self-esteem. There are so many, and I'm going to leave it up there a little bit and we can talk as we talk. If you want to add more, if more come to mind, feel free. Um, there are a couple that the research identified that we didn't. Um, and I know that they're going to be familiar to you as well. Um, Rural access to face-to-face programs, just distance. And in South Dakota, especially, that can be a real barrier for a lot of our students. I remember one time I had a phone call from a young woman who she she lived in Gan Valley, and she said, I want to come to GED classes. And I said, there's got to be a program closer to you. And she said, I don't think so. I've done some research. Um, so I started, kind of Googling distances and places that I knew that there were adult education programs with GED services. And she was right. I mean, she's a good hour and a half away from Huron, but we were the closest by about 20 minutes from any other place. She's kind of like literally out there in the middle of nowhere. So, she was looking for services, and this was before we really had the ability to do distance education. She was looking for services, and she was willing to do that drive if she needed to come in and work on her GED. So that rural access to our programs can be a huge barrier sometimes. We had a few that I think match with mental health issues, but I always think it bears calling that out. Some of our students are struggling with a lot of things that are increasing their cognitive load. And so the ones that you all listed there and more. Difficulty navigating systems. And I think that kind of ties into the fear that somebody listed on the Mentimeter. Sometimes you just don't know where to go, who to talk to, or what it's going to be like. And I think that difficulty navigating those systems leads to some of that fear and anxiety about coming in. I'm just reading down my list here. You got a lot of them. Somebody mentioned technology, and lack of access to devices and reliable internet is definitely one of the barriers the research cited. Limited digital literacy of not just students, but sometimes staff, right? Can affect that. And sometimes availability of support services to address those things that you all listed on the Mentimeter. We, as much as we want to, can't be everything to everybody. So we've got to make those referrals, but sometimes those support services are hard to find, especially for some of our students in those more rural areas. So thank you for putting those on the list and for participating and for jumping into the technology when I didn't give you much warning. I appreciate that. So now, how can we apply the research on flexibility to help us address these challenges and barriers? There's a few ways. And as I did a couple of months ago, I kind of tried to pick out categories that the research studies that were cited really fell into, I thought. So the first one we're going to talk about, and by all means, if you have another idea, you take me somewhere else because I've got others, but we can go wherever you want to too. But the first one that I had called out was flexible delivery models. Several of the research studies just talked about the way we deliver services. Now, the first study was really focused on distance learning, right? They found that distance learning increased attendance while measurable skill gains stayed high in California. This was a study that was done as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So they were really looking at how did this impact California's services and outcomes. So, they called out a lot of those technology issues, and onboarding students to the use of tech from the beginning was something they identified as very important. They cited welcome videos and tutorials as keys to success. Their retention rates and digital literacy rates went up in virtual delivery. And they had good responses from students as well that said that they liked that delivery. But there are also other ways to think about those flexible delivery models. A couple of the studies cited the need to be flexible, addressing the needs of students, those support services and wraparound services, mental health services. And again, not providing those things necessarily, but making sure students know where to access those services if they need them. The third study I thought was a very interesting one. It specifically was looking at student veterans. Which again is another large group that we see at times. And they listed flexibility, including part-time coursework, as vital to their success. One of the studies mentioned flexible learning opportunities don't mean leaving students to study on their own or having them dictate their entire course of study, right? We still have to balance that student autonomy with the need to have some guidance through their course of study. And then again, non-traditional adult learners are a huge group and they can benefit from some competence-based education, which again, harkens back to all of the adult education research that I've ever been exposed to in my years in adult ed, where we talk about linking what students are learning to things that are happening in their real lives, contextualized learning for workplace, for home, for their children's school, all those different things. Any thoughts from anybody on the flexibility of delivery models and how we might be more flexible in what we're providing to our students?
I think something cool that I've noticed since we've switched to online classes is that we have a variety of different teachers who can work with students. So finding a teacher whose kind of teaching style matches up with what works for a student to learn, or not all of our math classes are the same. Or like I had a student that I didn't think I was best equipped to help, but Andrew has those kinds of strengths, so they've helped that student. And so I think that with us being able to help students not in our area, um, we can have different pairings of teachers and students.
I think that's a great call out. And I think that actually, the relationship between instructors and students was specifically called out in one of the studies, and I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was. But they did talk about, those relationships with our adult learners are so important. And having that student-teacher relationship and something that clicks makes a difference. And I think you make a good point, Nikita. It's not that you're not a great teacher if you have a student who you just don't really connect with. We're all just different people. So helping them find a teacher who either their teaching style matches more with theirs, the content that they're delivering maybe is a little bit different than what you're delivering, can really make a difference in that student sticking with it and persisting. And our willingness to do that is important too, because again, I think sometimes we just want to like hang on and say like, no, I can do this, I can do this. Sometimes we don't have to do it, right? Sometimes we can pass it to somebody else and they can do it just as well or better for that particular student. Other thoughts about flexible delivery?
I just think that flexible delivery meets them where they are,
Say more
right?
about that, Diane.
Yeah. If I'm struggling to come into person, maybe that's my favorite way of doing it. I really enjoy being face to face with the teacher, but life has just really got busy or crazy, or I've had a medical emergency, or my family member has. I don't have to stop out now, right? I can continue learning. So I just think it meets me where I am, or it meets the students where they are, and that's what uh, will help with retention, I think.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah, a very good point. So many of our students' barriers are very personal things, right? And being able to help them continue on when they're dealing with those personal things that we all have in our lives, um, it's an important thing. It's an important thing. And yeah, the ability to offer virtual programming has helped a lot in that area, I know, for many of our programs. Great, great. The next area we're going to look at is flexible services. This is one that I kind of hesitated because this is not something that we necessarily directly provide, right? But I have found, and I know our staff have found, some big frustrations in trying to help our students who need those support services and those wraparound services. It's been difficult to find places that they can access them from a distance as well, right? And as much as those abilities have grown over the last 4 or 5 years, they're still kind of lagging behind in some areas. So I think that accessibility of those support services and knowing how to refer to some of those support services is an important thing as well. Thinking about um, ways that we can help our students connect to them, whether that's giving them the opportunity to maybe use our technology to do it, helping facilitate creating an account to make it happen, those kinds of things. But again, the research was pretty clear that one of the things that we can do to help mitigate some of those challenges is, again, to increase the digital literacy skills of our students so they feel more comfortable accessing different services in a virtual format as well. And again, of course, we've always got those accessibility issues, which we've worked really hard to try and help students find those low-cost internet services or no-cost internet services, help them find pathways to devices that aren't just their phones, but also helping them maximize the use of their phones if that's what they have too. So I know even the troubleshooting, one of Kim's favorite stories is one of our very longtime students was having difficulty, and she's great about coming in when she has problems. She was having difficulty accessing class. She's like, it always worked, but it won't work now. She had, I don't even know, like 3,000 videos or something on her phone. It's like, well, you're just out of room. So we have to clear some of these off. You either got to let them go or you got to send them to the cloud. But just explaining those things sometimes too. I know I was telling somebody in the office, I had been going through my photos, just kind of flipping through, and all of a sudden I came to a whole stack of them that were like work related. They were like pictures of books or screenshots of things where somebody was having difficulty with a computer or something. And I was like, well, I can just get rid of all these because I don't need them clogging up my phone. Helping our students understand that as well can be something that can help them to access some of those flexible services. And then again, thinking about how flexibility in our services can give students increased access to some of the places where they maybe can't access those services virtually. Our flexibility might free up time that they can use to visit some of those services who aren't as open as we are in terms of times of day, methods of delivery, those kinds of things. When you have to see the dentist, you have to see the dentist, right? I mean, it's as far as I know, there's no virtual dentistry that can fix a cavity or anything like that. So sometimes you've got to be able to go into those places in those office hours. And if we can be flexible on our end to help our students be able to do those things, it can also assist them. One of the interesting points I found in here was single points of contact. A couple of the different studies identified implementing single points of contact to help adults, somebody who's really familiar with their situation, who they're comfortable talking to and working with. I think that kind of goes back to what Nikita called out, finding that right person who can work with that student who they're comfortable talking to in terms of other outside help that they might need besides our academic assistance. And I thought that was very interesting.
Becky, this is Laura, and I actually have a question about that.
Sure.
So something that I noticed in the summaries you sent to us was the single point of contact for students re-enrolling in services. And Amy and I have had a conversation and I was like, wow, there's a lot to unpack here about how we re-enroll students that have stopped out of the program, or maybe they've been gone for a couple of months or a year, and maybe they thought it was only 2 weeks. For example, I'm curious what promising practices exist within the field in our state for that, because part of our flexibility is offering the students the ability to, in our world, go from in-person to online, or to go
Right.
from online to in-person, or change the time of day because now they have a job. So the flexibility in scheduling, but also helping the students really know how to re-enter easily, like how to re-enter without a lot of confusion and administrative overhead. What are people doing for re-enrollment purposes, and do we have single points of contact for that? Or does that just bog up someone's day?
I think that's a very interesting question. I kind of had the same question as I was going through the research. Should we be doing this? Because we've kind of felt the opposite. Like, the more people that students have to connect to, the more they might gravitate to a person who they feel more comfortable with. So yeah, this raised more questions than answers for me as well, Laura. I kind of had the same thought. And particularly, as you said, with the students re-entering a program, having that single point of contact, the research kind of indicates that it is an important piece. And yet, how do we do that? And is it only one single point of contact for all students? Or is it that each student has their single point of contact that they're dealing with? So they're not getting passed off to, oh, well, now you need to talk to Nikita. Oh, Nikita's going to send you to Andrew. Oh, now Andrew's going to bump you back to me. And you feel like you're getting the runaround. Yeah, I agree with you. There is a lot to unpack there, and I don't know that I've done it sufficiently yet to be able to feel like I have an answer. We're not using what I would call a single point of contact for reentry, or really for anything at this point. But I do think, and Cornerstone's teachers, you can argue with me if you want to, and I won't be sad about that because you're the ones who are on the front line there. I do think our students do kind of self-select a single point of contact at times, where it's a person that they are comfortable with, who they've worked with, and who that's their go-to person when they have questions. Any other thoughts?
Can I ask a follow-up question of how long do our programs in South Dakota have people re-enroll and retest right off the bat? Or is everybody doing like we do, looking in the database to see how long this person actually was gone and if they need a retest and a re-enrollment appointment, and then they take up space where a new student could have come in, and it just feels a little bit hairy to me, but I'm curious what programs they're doing right now.
At Cornerstones, we do the same thing. I mean, we take a look at, how long has this student been gone? Do they need a new assessment? Do we need to update intake? And if they don't, they are, I mean, they have a shorter path to re-enrollment. And I think you raise a question that we've asked ourselves, right? So who gets that fast track? Should it be the re-entering student? Should it be the student who's on that fresh path and hasn't had to stop out yet? And I know I could argue it both ways myself and have. So I, again, don't really have an answer for that one.
At least I feel like I'm on the right track asking the same questions you have.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, this one gave me more questions than answers when we were talking about flexibility, because I feel like we do really well in some aspects, and I think in others we probably still have some thinking and working to do on it. The other one that I just want to call out, just because I know this is such an issue in many of our communities, and this is not something that we ourselves again can do, but the 7th study here was geared really towards post-secondary institutions, but I just think it's an interesting statistic. The number of post-secondary institutions that have daycare centers has decreased over the last 15 years, even though research shows that student parents who have access to childcare are 3 times more likely to graduate from a post-secondary institution. And I think when we think about our students and how often childcare is the main barrier that will keep them out of class on any given day, I can totally understand that. So I thought that was a very interesting statistic. And yeah, that same study also said adult learners often require a more intimate and interactive relationship with an academic advisor than the norm. And again, I think we can all testify to the accuracy of that statement. It's all about those relationships. This one is going to be a free-for-all because John Anderson's out of town, so he's not on the webinar today. But flexible policies and procedures. And again, some of this is within our scope, some of it's out of our hands. But again, and I think for those of us who have been providing some virtual services, cracking the nut on remote intake and assessment is still an ongoing process, I believe. And I think that there, more and more tools are coming out to help with that, especially in terms of some of the translation services through things like Zoom and, Google Translate, all those different things. And again, additional programs that can help us do outreach to students in a virtual way. But yeah, those policies and procedures sometimes I think still can get in our way. And some of them we just simply can't change, right? You have to do assessment. And I know right now a lot of our students are sick of hearing us talk about assessment because it's the end of the year and we're badgering all of them. But sometimes there are creative ways to think in terms of the policies and procedures we have, at least in our own programs. And I think Laura has mentioned a couple of those already. How do we deal with students who are re-entering the program? Do we have those single points of contact, and how does that work for us? Have we done enough work trying to figure out why our students are really leaving and if our onboarding processes are contributing to that? Stephen was on early today, and before we started recording, we were talking about his class, and he said there are several students who just haven't started yet, and he continues to reach out to them. But what causes a student to go through the enrollment, intake paperwork, assessment orientation process and then not come to class? And is it something that we can do better? Or is it just the nature of some of our students who are, busy lives and all those challenges and barriers that we listed at the beginning, realizing that this isn't necessarily the best time to start? So yeah, I think we at Cornerstones have been looking at those onboarding processes a lot over the last year and trying to improve them. And we've seen statistic improvements in our retention, but I think the ones that don't come still bother us, right? They still plague us a little bit. Other thoughts about
Becky,
policy?
I'm chuckling a little bit because we recently offered a class. Sorry to talk over you. I didn't know you were.
No, go ahead.
We recently enrolled students in a class where, as a part of this project, which we have several different partners working on the project, it's not only AEL, they can receive up to $1,000 when they complete the class. And we still have attrition. And they had to jump through hoops to get to that class, and they had time to think about it. So I feel like it's something that's always with us in adult education. You can hardly even pay people to be a student with consistent attendance, and in Stephen's situation, they didn't show up. We thought that these individuals would show, and
Yeah.
no sign of them, and they don't answer the phone call and that type of thing. It's quite the mystery.
And $1,000 isn't chump change. I mean, that's a good deal of money, that's $1,000 is a lot of groceries. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Kim had sent me an email earlier in the week. She had heard from a student who told her they wouldn't be starting class in May, because they had moved to Minnesota. So this is somebody who did intake enrollment assessment at the end of April and before May 6th had said, oh, but I'm moving to Minnesota. And she's like, so how would we head this off at the pass? And, and my answer, and I was only halfway being flippant, was, should we start to ask? Like, are you planning to live in South Dakota for at least a couple months? Because some of our students are that transient at times because they're following work or they're struggling with housing or all of those things. But yeah, it's like, so we invested this time and energy into this person, and then within the next couple of weeks, they're like, oh, but I'm moving to Minnesota. And then we invested a little bit more time helping them connect with programs in the area of Minnesota that they were moving to, because that's who we are. So, what can we do? Should we have some other policies and procedures in place to try to help avoid some of those non-starter students? And Stephen, it might have been somebody in your class. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah.
Well,
So.
I have a couple other students too. They'll show up for like 2, 3 days and then they'll drop off the radar for a couple days and they'll come right back like they
Yeah.
had been there forever, I guess. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know, but
Yeah, it's kind of just the nature of the business, right? They'll be in, they'll be out. It's been glorious weather here for a few days now, and I'm interested in looking at what the attendance sheets look like for the last week or so, just because um, we all know this happens, right? When the weather gets nice, they start to get drawn away, especially those evening classes. As the sun stays out longer and the weather is nice, people they get off of work and they just want to be outside. They want to be doing something fun. Class isn't as appealing. Although we have had students who have joined us on their tablets from outside in the past. So maybe the virtual classes help in that respect too. School's coming to an end and kids are at home. Karen mentioned in the chat. So yeah, there's a lot of things that pop up this time of year that can be difficult. I also think, and somebody mentioned this in our office not that long ago too, the number of activities at school in the months of April and May are ridiculous. We've got programs and plays and concerts and sporting events and awards nights and all different kinds of things that are going to pull our parents out, especially in the evening classes, which is, I know, our busiest time. That's where the bulk of our students attend because they're working more traditional daytime hours. So we do see more absences of that kind, where they're here for a couple days, they're gone for a couple days because of some of those school activities that their kids are engaged in and the parents wanting to be engaged too, which honestly, I'm not going to argue with. I want them engaged in their kids' lives, right? But it does lead to difficulty sometimes in keeping them engaged in our program as well. So, yeah. Any other policies and procedures that are on anybody's minds that might get in our way in terms of student persistence? I'd love to tell you we didn't have to assess them, but it's just not the case. All right, a couple other call outs from some of the research studies. And again, these are things that I think we're all aware of and we all know, but it's just nice to know that there's actual research that supports it. Instruction has to be designed to be as efficient as possible to meet the needs of adults in the limited time they have to devote to study. And again, framing that learning in real world contexts, tying it to their lives outside of our classroom is so very important for our adult learners so that they can anchor on to those real world needs and apply what they're learning in our classrooms. And again, students, even though they crave some autonomy, they still need a facilitator who can help them. And I thought this was interesting, create ideal conditions for learning. And I think especially for our students who are maybe coming to us from home, we see those less than ideal learning conditions sometimes. And they're created by the need for them to be joining us from home. You know, there's kids in the background. Maybe there's a baby sitting on the lap. There's all those different things going on. I know Nikita and Karen have one student who they share who his whole life is kind of a distraction. He will, you know, we've got to remind him sometimes, you need to turn the TV off now, 'cause class, you know, he'll just leave it on in the background and it's loud. And he kind of forgets it's there. I think it's the background noise to his whole life, and they'll just have to remind him, got to turn the TV off now, we're in class, and he'll happily go do it. But you know, that's part of that, creating those learning conditions so that students actually have the opportunity to be in that optimum learning situation. So it's hard at home. I talk to our students about this all the time. There's times when I'm working at home that I really struggle, right? I'm sitting there and thinking I should go throw a load of laundry in, and then, you know, you do that, and then you're listening for the load of laundry to be done so you can put it in the dryer, and it's, you know, how is that really serving what I'm trying to concentrate on? Probably not. So.
I have an older lady. I think she's from Yankton. Deb, you might know her, but she's got a French bulldog that sits on the couch with her during the whole class. And just to break it up once in a while, we have to say, well, "Where's Coco?" So we have to find Coco and kind of shows him for a while. So I think they like humor quite a bit. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you think that they're, you know, initially I watched some of the I've taught online before, but I mean, where it's kind of stiff and kind of formal, but my classes kind of have a little bit of a flexibility, I guess, and there's some humor, and they get to know you a little bit. And if you're a little self-deprecating too, they kind of like that a little bit. So, but yeah, Coco, I think Coco's going to get a degree. I think he's going to.
Is Coco multilingual now? That's the important
I
thing.
think so. Probably.
That's good. That's good.
If I can physically see that a student has an animal, I will demand to be introduced to the animal. I can and have done that before. But I mean, I joke about it, but it is a nice thing. Students can share their animals at home. And even if you don't really like cats and dogs, you know, it's funny. It's just a nice 1 minute quick break thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that goes to, you know, one of the main things I know when we were talking about going fully virtual, that teachers were very concerned about was how are we going to build those classroom relationships, not just student teacher, but students together. And I think that, you know, asking where's Coco every once in a while is one of the ways you do those things. You know, the students get to know each other. They know that the dog is there. It lightens the mood a little bit. It gives you, again, that little bit of a cognitive break, right? Oh, we're all just going to stop. We're going to laugh a little bit. We're going to talk to the dog. And then we're going to pick up and we're going to move on. And yeah, I think that those things are very important, very important. And I agree with you, Stephen. I think the more that you make the class comfortable for students and not stiff and not formal, you know, that's not really who we are. We're a little more, I would say, casual than formal. I think that they're going to respond to that, and they're going to understand that they have the ability as well to joke a little, to share a little bit about their lives, and that helps them remain engaged. And it helps us all then to understand when they do have some of those things going on in their lives that might pull them away from class. So, all right. All of the studies presented encouraged program leaders to develop flexible mindsets when examining things like delivery models, services, policies, and procedures, just classroom management too. You know, just because something has worked in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's going to continue to work in the present. And I think we all know that, right? But it is so hard to let go of what we have done in the past. I think that that's human nature. Change is difficult. It's really, really hard. But I think the other thing that we've really found, and I think, honestly, I think this is one of the things the pandemic has helped us with in a way, is we understand that things do change, and sometimes they change drastically and quickly, and sometimes they change more slowly, and it's harder for us to notice. So, you know, keeping an eye on things like your student demographics, what the students' expectations and needs of our programs are, what are their preferences for learning? Those things continually change, and just staying in touch with our students, which happens when we have those relationships with them, like Stephen was describing, right? When we have that friendly relationship, when students feel like they can share things, when they feel comfortable with you, when you are a little self-deprecating, they're going to be more willing to pipe in and say, you know, teacher, I've been thinking about this, or this isn't working for me. That's acceptable in an adult education classroom. And it's really, you know, I hope we're finding ways to encourage students to do that, or to ask for things that they would like more of. We just had this conversation again, right? As no matter how often you think you're giving students enough talk time or enough conversation time, they always want more and more, 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 more. Which tells us as teachers, like, we think we're doing a good job, and we are doing a good job, but they want even more. And we told our teachers a long time ago, and we continue to tell them, don't ask the question if you're not prepared to deal with the answer, right? If you're asking your students, do you have enough time to do this in class? And they say no, you better find a way to carve out more time and do that in class. So yeah. Danette said in the chat, one way to be flexible is to find out how they learned English in their country. This is an excellent point, Danette. Thank you. In Asia, they don't learn past participle. They learn it as a V3 or verb 3. So when teaching, I use verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, and then the matching English terms. It helps when learning the grammar. And then she said, I'm leaving to get my kids. But excellent point. I think it's really fascinating to find out where in the world, countries in the world that focus more of their English instruction on print than on oral, and then vice versa. That's always been really, really interesting to me, because you know, we're getting a lot of students right now in Huron from Vietnam who have very good print skills, and their oral skills are way behind. And in the past, that's been an opposite for us, right? Usually their oral skills are developed first, and their print skills are the ones that are a little bit further behind. But for whatever reason, when they're learning English in Vietnam, they're very much focused on the print skills. So that's interesting. I will never forget when we had a young man, and this was many years ago, a young man from England who had moved here and was going to get married, and he wanted to get his GED. I don't remember if he didn't have his high school diploma from England, or if he just thought it would be easier if he just got his GED, you know, to get into a college and to go on with his post-secondary education. But he was explaining to us how very, very different the notational system for math is in Great Britain than it is in the US. And you know, it's it's naive. I understand that, and I was much, much younger then. But it's like, well, but they speak English, so shouldn't they do math the same way we do? You know? And no, they don't at all. So yeah, those kinds of things are very interesting, and Danette raises a really good point. I think, you know, talking with our students and understanding where they're coming from in their educational background is very important, especially those students who are very highly educated in their home countries. Understanding where their education took them in terms of English language learning is very interesting. So. Any other thoughts about that? I saw some nods along the way.
Well,
I I lived in England for a few years, and we worked with some of the students in a kind of a student housing area, kind of for homeless kids in London.
Uh-huh.
And in England, they take the A levels and O levels. I get mixed up which is which. I think the O level is up to 16, but the 16-year-olds were the equivalent at the time. I did some reading on research on it, and the 16-year-olds in England were the equivalent of the 18-year-olds over in the States, and they were just really bright kids. And they had pretty rigorous academics, I guess. And I didn't know much about math though, but in terms of English and history and such, but interesting. That was years ago though.
Yeah.
25.
I had another thought about the flexible mindset. We're so used to doing, and it might be back into like programmatic as well, but in thinking about assessments, in our program, the teachers always decided when the students were ready for their assessment. But we started something new to help the students see how often they actually do come to class.
Oh,
So we're giving them like a stamp on a calendar so they can see how many days actually they're coming. And so what I've had my students do, and I think the other teachers do the same thing, is they're adding up how many days did I come in February and March and April. The ticket is, for my students, I tell them, when you have 30 stamps, let me know and I'll put you up for an assessment.
oh,
Because we kind of decided that after about 30 days of that 60 hours, right? If
Right.
two, right, then we should give them that assessment. So I've had students come up to me, I would say every week, because we're now getting to where if they came most often, they're at that 30.
Mhm.
And they're saying to me, it's my time, teacher. Like they're tracking it.
Interesting.
They're tracking it and they're graduating. But time goes with, as a teacher, time goes and you're expecting a little bit more, but they're right where they should be. And then the challenge will come from the next level, right? So,
Right.
yeah, that has been really a great in addition, a changing of our mindset
I
from
like
my responsibility as a teacher to their self-advocacy to theirs. Yeah.
And for
It
them to
sounds
be
like
the
a
one saying,
good motivator. It sounds like
Mhm.
a good motivator to have students come to class, and they probably don't even realize how many times they've been gone, and they're more likely to retain it if they come all the time and not have a big gap where they're not coming to class. That's a very good idea. I like it.
yeah. And I like linking it to that change in mindset as well as kind of a change in policy. But then you're also working through that student autonomy, right? I mean, like you're saying, they're the ones saying it's time for me to take a test instead of us saying it's time for you to take a test and them feeling like apprehensive and fearful. They're the ones saying, nope, it's time. I've been here. I know what I'm doing. I've been into enough class. I should have learned this. I like that a lot for a lot of reasons. Thank you, Diana, for sharing that. That's really interesting. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to the next point I had in my notes, which is, we might be really comfortable with the status quo in our programs, in our classrooms, but our students might not. And switching things up might help them see things from a different perspective as well as us. So, we just need, I think, one of the things that we really try hard to do is continually ask, is what we're doing serving our students in the best way possible? Is there something we could be doing that would better serve our students, that would help them more? And that would, in addition, perhaps make our jobs easier, right? Because that's important too. We don't want to overburden ourselves at the expense of making things easier for our students. We need to find that balance where we can still manage the workload because it's a big workload, and still provide that quality of service to our students where they're going to feel that our program is worth the time that they put into it when they're coming in. So yeah, very good. Thank you all. Has anybody got anything else?
Well, I'm kind of new, but what does trigger an assessment? I know in training,
Oh, yep.
they mentioned that we should watch ourselves and kind of recommend them for a move up perhaps or whatever
Yep.
like that. But does anything ever trigger assessment, like the end of a class or, you know?
The
That-
main thing, and
Or-
this again goes back to policy, the main thing in policy is our students, when they come into our program, are supposed to have a minimum of 60 hours of instruction before they have their initial post-test. So that's where Diana was talking about the 30 stamps for the 2-hour classes. That's when they would hit 60. And really after that, Stephen, it's a lot of it comes at the discretion of the instructor. And I think at the request of the student too. Sometimes we'll have students ask for an assessment. I want to see how much I've learned. I want to see if I'm at this point. Or you might just see a student, and particularly in your class where you're starting with the ones who are very much lower, they might, get ready to move up into that next level. And if you've got somebody who's kind of outpacing the class, we've had that happen in the last couple of months too, where teachers say, this student really, I mean, like every question I ask, they're on it right away and they've got it. And, I need to move them up so that they're more challenged. And that they're not intimidating to the rest of the students who are not really at that point yet. So there are a few different things that can happen. And when you get to that point, a lot of times I'll trust the discretion of the instructor if that student isn't quite ready numerically for an assessment yet to move them up to a higher level, but we can certainly assess them as well. So we've got that kind of formal piece in place and say, yep, your skills are high enough, you should move up. Very good question. Very good question. So I have one more resource for you that wasn't included in the literature review. If you're looking for more evidence-based resources to kind of help you through the process of complex changes that we sometimes need to make in our programs, Essential Education has released a booklet called The 6 Anchors of Student Retention. And this is what they say it provides. This is a quote: "A comprehensive approach to the complex challenges surrounding adult student retention. It includes findings from a year-long professional learning community which engaged in research and experimentation on strategies for student retention." I'm going to drop the link to download a digital version into the chat for everyone. So if you want to grab one, you certainly may. They were handing these out like candy at COABE. So you may have already seen one if you were at COABE or if you had a coworker who was at COABE. If not, you can hit that link and grab a digital copy. If anybody has been part of, they've done a webinar series as well, Essential Education has, on student retention and persistence. That's been pretty interesting. So I think a lot of the findings from this study probably came from some of the people who were presenting during that webinar series. So it's been pretty interesting. And I'm always looking for practitioner-led kinds of research. Those are the ones that I think really speak to most of our hearts and minds. Those people who can say that they've been in the trenches with us. So that is just about our time. Thank you again for all your contributions. I always appreciate these discussions. And next month, Laura Smith-Hill will be revisiting teaching skills that matter. Laura, would you like to say anything about that?
Yes, I would. And I will be introducing during TSTM's review session, I'll be introducing Diana Calvetti-Strelek and Amy Quiroga, who will be the lead facilitators of that session. And TSTM stands for Teaching Skills That Matter. We had a small team, a cohort of TSTM lead instructors that participated in that national technical assistance training the year before last. And it was quite intensive. And it had a lot of best practices that are applicable not only to teaching English as a second language, but also the other levels of adult basic education that we deal with. So we are excited to have that. They have some really insightful ideas to share. And Diana, I believe there is some pre-work, if I remember correctly, that we'll be sending to everybody about
Yes.
4 weeks before the T3 takes place, so that you can do some pre-reflection and have a more rich discussion. Anything you want to add, Diana, to that?
No, I think that's all, correct, Amy? We've been gathering some materials, right? Because some of the questions are difficult and you have to ponder and think. So I look forward to that discussion.
That sounds excellent. I can't wait. And we'll look forward to our homework
Yeah, right.
and
Yeah.
do it happily. Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah.
And thank you again for your support of the T3s. I know the professional development team has seen these as a very high priority. And it's always great to see the attendance and interaction at these sessions. So thanks again for your attention and for everything
Yeah,
you
thank
do.
you.
Everybody have a happy Thursday.
Thank you.